우리는 이렇게 같은 시간 같은 공간에 모여서 서로 얼굴을 맞대고 있습니다만 어떠십니까? 여러분은 세상과 연결돼 있다고 생각하시나요? 이 한 통계에 따르면요, 우리 국민 중에 21.1%, 그러니까 5명 중에 1명꼴로는 나는 외롭다, 나는 고립되어 있다라는 답변을 했다고 합니다. 그런 결과대로라면 여기 모이신 분들 중에서도 외로운 분이시고 그죠? 5분 중에 1분은 외로운 분이실 겁니다. 근데 이런 외로움의 문제는 비단 우리나라만의 문제가 아닌 것 같습니다. 해외에서도 이미 영국에서 세계 최초로 외로움부 장관이 탄생을 했고요. 일본도 고독, 고립 담당 장관을 임명했다고 하죠. 이제 외로움은 더 이상 개인의 문제가 아니라 국가적 차원에서 대응하고 관리해야 할 사회 문제로 떠오르고 있습니다. 자, 이러한 시대적 흐름 속에서 철학과 인문학의 시각으로 외로움의 본질을 꿰뚫고 계시는 분이 계십니다.
Yes, we can. To every opportunity, improve yourself, be successful, work hard, and maybe this is the right time to say, whiting. The faster we respond to the accumulated emails in our inboxes or text messages on our smartphones, the faster new messages arrive. The pressures of competition and failure is the enemy. How many of us feel we belong somewhere or to something? Their loneliness must be unbearably painful. Rising rates of anxiety, depression, panic, loneliness, and suicide. And we might reflect on the question of who is responsible. To be lonely is to feel a sense of abandonment, not only by another person, but also by the world. We must imagine another way for human beings to live together. What kind of world do we want to build? What image or vision do we have of the future?
현대인들의 외로움을 해석하고 그 해법을 함께 나누어 주실 세계적인 외로움 전문가 다이앤 엔스 교수님을 뜨거운 박수로 환영해 주시기 바랍니다.
Thank you very much. I can't begin to tell you how happy I am to be here, how honored I am to have been invited to this great event. In my lecture today, I will speak of loneliness. I will address the theme of this forum directly through the phenomenon of mass loneliness, reflecting on each of its central terms: connection, prosperity, innovation, and a sustainable future. My task is to redefine these terms. Connection is the very definition of our 21st century digital existence. Though it has always been vital for human life, connection has developed into new forms that no longer require an embodied encounter with another person. Innovation is the darling of our free market system. Defined purely in economic terms, it evokes progress, growth, competition, increased efficiency, and the ability to pivot as needed. Unlike invention, innovation requires a minimum of imagination. It demands instead flexibility. We must bend to the will of a tyrannical market for the sake of profit. Prosperity is measured by our capacity to accumulate wealth in order to procure what we desire and to produce ever new desires in order to increase a profitable cycle of production and consumption. Prosperity encourages an instrumental approach to life. Whatever is not useful on the path to economic success is not valued. Usefulness replaces meaningfulness. And finally, what of our future? We may yearn for a future that will sustain all life forms on Earth, But our dream is blocked by sheer human hubris. Since the beginning of the modern age, we have been blinded by the illusion of infinite progress, by our stubborn belief in the inexhaustible benefits of wealth and technology. This illusion is profoundly unsustainable. As we look around us at a world engulfed in political, social, economic, and environmental crises, it seems clear that we need to finally renounce our faith in unlimited progress and rethink the meaning of connection, prosperity, and innovation in order to rescue our future from the illusions of modernity. It may be surprising to focus on loneliness as we carry out this critical task, but I will maintain throughout this lecture that the loneliness we now witness on a global scale provides us with unique insights into the human condition of the 21st century. I would like to suggest that loneliness is a collective experience we must interpret. It defies any simple reduction to the mental state of a particular individual. When we understand loneliness as a personal experience, the individual is held solely responsible, not only for their own suffering, but also for relieving it. There is a tendency to shame the lonely person for what is perceived to be a personal failure. They are made to feel unloved and even unlovable. This is the wrong approach. It only intensifies the isolation of the lonely individual by emphasizing their status as an outcast. The current loneliness crisis is a symptom of the collapse of human sociality, a warning that we are at risk of losing the ability to relate to one another with respect, empathy, and understanding, as well as the capacity to care for each other. Today, in a world that seems unbearably uncertain, the negative effects of this social breakdown are escalating precisely at the moment when we are most in need of a resilient and robust sociality. Uncertainty produces collective fear and anxiety. These are mental states with isolating effects. We discovered that fear and anxiety in a context of isolation and loneliness work extremely well to foster division and hostility. Isolation creates the conditions in which a population becomes easier to manipulate. It is no exaggeration to say today that loneliness plays a central role in the global rise of new forms of fascism and authoritarianism, at the same time that it underlies rising rates of social withdrawal and suicide. Any vision for the future that reimagines the terms under question, connection, innovation, prosperity, and the future itself, must at the same time be a vision that addresses loneliness and create a social infrastructure based on care and solidarity that will be capable of resisting the brutal destruction of all forms of life and even the planet itself. First, I want to reflect on what it means to be lonely. Two scholars have been particularly important for me in this reflection, both German Jews who fled Germany in 1933 when Hitler became its chancellor, and they ended up in America, the psychiatrist Frieda Fromm-Reichmann and the political theorist Hannah Arendt. Following Frieda Fromm-Reichmann, I define loneliness as an unfulfilled desire for human togetherness. I like to make an analogy with hunger. The lonely person experiences a mental and emotional malnourishment, a psychological equivalent to the physical sensation of an empty stomach. Hunger and loneliness are cravings based on a non-negotiable need: a home, a neighborhood, a community, a city, and that we can, through our talents and passions, contribute to something larger than ourselves. These relational elements of human existence are what make life meaningful. So loneliness reminds us that human beings not only need to connect with one another, but also need to experience meaning throughout their lives. We may be social creatures, but we are also individuals who appreciate autonomy and privacy when we are fortunate enough to have them. Separation and distance, solitude, silence, and safety from those who are cruel or abusive are as necessary as human intimacy. The push and pull between being alone and being together speaks to the ambiguity of the human condition. Everyone has a different sense of balance between aloneness and togetherness. There is always the risk that with too much togetherness, we may feel imprisoned within a group. But with too much solitude, we may feel imprisoned within a self. We have to walk a fine line between these two poles. I responded that there is something wrong with our societies if we suffer loneliness merely because we choose to live alone. Nearly all of us will feel a less severe form of individual loneliness at one time or another in our lives. It is a universal existential experience that may arise when we turn away from all distractions and find ourselves alone when we don't want to be, lacking the comfort of human company. The focus on individual experience, however, has led to decades of research on loneliness that ignores the underlying structures that produce and reinforce it. When we treat it only as a personal problem, we inevitably look for solutions that leave these structural conditions intact. The lonely person becomes society's scapegoat, perceived as a pariah or an outcast who is deficient in social skills, who wallows in self-pity and fails to make the effort needed to alter their circumstances. We don't feel lonely simply for personal reasons, because we are unmarried or live alone or have few friends, but because there are structures in place that give rise to loneliness and reinforce it, sometimes even intentionally. When we shift from the psychological to the political perspective, it becomes clear that loneliness is a symptom of social failure rather than personal failure. It is produced by certain work conditions, the pressures of competition, poverty and old age, isolation due to housing arrangements, the stigma of losing a job, social media abuse. Hannah Arendt illuminates the political implications of loneliness for us in the remarkable conclusion to her analysis of 20th century totalitarianism under Hitler and Stalin, whose regimes relied on a deadly combination of ideology and terror. We know well enough from history that terror relies on ideology to function. Any form of authoritarian rule divides its subjects into victims and perpetrators by punishing those who persist in thinking independently and rewarding those who blindly follow the simple maxims of those in power. We could name countless historical and contemporary examples of such ideological maxims. If you are an immigrant, a communist, an ethnic minority, a colonized subject, a Palestinian, a Rohingya, or simply poor, for example, you deserve to be imprisoned, exiled, or even exterminated. Ideology assists terror in its desire for the total defeat of opposition, an opposition that is fabricated in order to facilitate extermination. Essential for the effective use of terror is isolation. Totalitarian rule succeeds only with the elimination of our capacity to join together for collective action, our human solidarity. Without this capacity, citizens become politically impotent. In Arendt's words, isolation is the most fertile ground for terror, and always its result. The totalitarian regime cultivates the suspicion and fear that cause isolation by turning neighbors against neighbors, family members against family members. And this, in turn, causes loneliness. In Arendt's view, to be lonely is to feel a sense of abandonment, not only by another person, but also by the world more generally. We lose a sense of belonging when we are lonely, which makes us feel superfluous, as though we have no place in the world that is recognized and guaranteed by others. And this means that loneliness is a perfect tool for terror. With brutal efficiency, a totalitarian regime can produce systemic loneliness enforced by terror that serves its destructive purposes. It is urgent for us to ask today, how many of us feel we belong somewhere or to something? How many of us feel our thoughts and opinions matter to a broader public? How many of us experience some form of community life? Arendt is perhaps the first to understand the dangers of systemic loneliness. She goes so far as to say that it is more dangerous than the powerlessness experienced by those who live under authoritarian rule. This is because loneliness, as she puts it, threatens to ravage the world as we know it. When human beings are isolated from one another, when they lack a sense of belonging, they become politically impotent because everything held in common withers away. The world then becomes a desert, to use Arendt's analogy. She insists that we should not try to flee or deny these desert conditions, but we should also refuse to adjust to them. Only the search for oases in the midst of the desert, for life-giving sources such as friendship and love, creation and reflection, can help us in this refusal to adapt. We are experiencing a new version of authoritarianism that scholars have referred to as techno-totalitarianism, or techno-fascism, or techno-authoritarianism. These terms acknowledge a number of trends. First, global power is increasingly concentrated in the hands of technocrats. Second, regimes that are already authoritarian are enhancing their power by appropriating AI for military purposes and surveillance technologies for the suppression of opposition. And third, techno-totalitarianism applies to the fact that our everyday lives are now lived in subjection to technological forces that seem impossible to resist. It is this last point that concerns me here, because isolation and loneliness are necessary for this subjection to work, just as they were necessary for totalitarianism to operate under Hitler and Stalin. It is important to keep in mind that technology does not operate in a vacuum, but in a symbiotic and unrestrained relationship to market capitalism. The race for technological innovation is at the same time the race for profit. I will use the term techno-capitalism to refer to this symbiotic entanglement. Techno-capitalism is governed by a principle that the philosopher Günther Anders described in 1980 as the belief that what can be made must be made, and whatever we make, we must use. He was thinking of the most horrific application of this logic in 1945. If human beings are clever enough to invent a hydrogen bomb capable of annihilating a city, they must build one, so the logic goes. If they build two, they must choose two cities to bomb. Today we might say, if we have the technological means to build lethal autonomous weapons systems, we have no choice but to build them. And once we have them, we must use them. So what is techno-capitalism doing to us? Daily life has become financialized. Creative life has become next to impossible. And we are exhausted from overwork and overstimulation. The outcome is a host of psychosocial symptoms, rising rates of anxiety, depression, panic, loneliness, and suicide. You might wonder why I want to redefine connection, the first term listed in the description of this forum. It seems to be a human good that everyone must value, and the very antidote to loneliness. Our capacity for connection has never been greater. We benefit immensely from the technologies that allow us to communicate instantly across vast different distances and to meet people from cultures once inaccessible to us. Given that loneliness appears to be on the rise globally, however, it is worth asking whether our new ways of connecting have negatively affected the way we communicate and relate to others. If we were to isolate what is most fundamental to human relationality, it would be empathy. When we feel empathy, according to the philosopher Edith Stein, we have a direct experience of another person's experience. It is as though we have entered into their pain or joy. We find ourselves in the sphere of their inner life. Their experience of happiness or suffering is transferred onto us. Stein tells us that our feelings of empathy also change us. We become aware of our own inner experiences and emotions when we share in others. And this shapes us as individual persons. This explains why witnessing someone suffer can cause us acute moral anguish, mental anguish, though we are not the victims. Empathy needs a body, a face-to-face encounter with sensory reality. Not only words, but expressions of desperation and pain arouse our empathy, as when we see images of starving infants and children in Gaza. We join with them in their suffering and feel their powerlessness even if we do not experience it directly. Empathy is what makes us human. By pulling us out of an ego-centered existence, it inspires acts of kindness, courtesy, and tenderness. In the sphere of human relations, our joining together requires understanding, sensitivity, and empathy. On the other hand, when empathy is not present, we merely connect, according to Berardi. Connection is the predominant way of relating to others in our digital era. He says it is merely functional, a product of the logical mind that has no need for empathy. Our exchanges without empathy are useful, but not meaningful. We connect perhaps hundreds of times in one day when we communicate through our electronic devices. While this connection is not without its pleasures, and is certainly convenient and beneficial in countless ways, it carries the risks of misunderstanding, of making hasty, ill-informed judgments, and of inflaming emotions. These are the perils of disembodied communication, and they can lead to digital rage and radicalization with real-time violent effects. In short, when we engage in a connective mode of relating, we risk losing emotional and empathic sensitivity. For this reason, I think we need to redefine the term connection by severing its ties with convenience and speed and reasserting its ties to empathy and sensitivity. Connection in this functional sense is all about speed, and speed is the modus operandi of our techno-capitalist economic system. The speed of connection gives us the illusion of flexibility and convenience, but in fact, it means we must work ever harder to keep pace with it. The faster we respond to the accumulated emails in our inboxes or text messages on our smartphones, the faster new messages arrive. The Korean-born philosopher Byung-Chul Han tells us that over-communication operates in tandem with overproduction and overachievement, all of which make us prone to burnout and other neurological conditions such as depression. We are living in what Han aptly calls an achievement society. Everyone is expected to be an entrepreneur and innovator, saying, "Yes, we can," to every opportunity in the name of enhanced productivity. This becomes an imperative. Improve yourself, be successful, work hard, and maybe this is the right time to say, "Wai ting." In the achievement society, we voluntarily submit to this command because it appeals to our personal sense of freedom and upward mobility. We come to perceive life as a personal project and the self as something that needs to be optimized. But when life is a project, we are always at risk of failing because we do not have the unlimited capacity to achieve whatever we desire. We are all limited by circumstances beyond our control. The achievement imperative is therefore a highly efficient method of subjection, since nothing external is needed to discipline the individual. We regulate ourselves because we demand the best of ourselves. This is a form of auto-exploitation or self-exploitation rather than autonomy. Following the imperative to say, "Yes, we can," makes for an extremely efficient and productive society, but one that is imprisoned in an individualism without limits. Each of us is bound within the borders of our own ego, measuring ourselves against others in an endless competition that demands a continual search for new self-improvement techniques. At some point, the pressure to achieve and improve, even if it is self-produced, becomes intolerable. There will be failure, and failure is the enemy in an achievement society. When the competition and threat of failure intensify, social withdrawal may seem to be the only choice. Reclusiveness, or hikikomori, which seems to be a term in use now globally, is both an act of self-defense and self-harm. Those who withdraw are protecting themselves from the shame of failure and from the pressures of the command to achieve, at the same time that they are punishing themselves for socioeconomic circumstances they did not create. Their loneliness must be unbearably painful, but less painful than the daily struggle to be productive. Byung-Chul Han warns us that in an achievement society, people will turn their aggression against themselves. The extreme manifestation of this self-aggression is suicide. Given these conditions, the current rise in rates of anxiety, depression, and suicide should perhaps not surprise us. It is not easy to criticize the achievement society from the inside. Again, we might reflect on the question of who is responsible. How can we fault parents, for example, for wanting a secure future for their children? Of course, when the future appears increasingly uncertain, parents will race to provide for their children. Unfortunately, we fail to notice what causes the anxiety and panic motivating this race. The assumption that we are all alone in the world, and each one of us must fend for ourselves because no one else will. We have accepted that no one will help our children in the future. Only money will. It is vital then that we redefine prosperity. Normally, prosperity is associated with wealth. The Cambridge Dictionary defines prosperity as the state of being successful and having a lot of money. The Merriam-Webster Dictionary allows for some interpretive flexibility, defining it as the condition of being successful or thriving, especially in terms of economic well-being. If we consider wealth exclusively in economic terms, we conclude that it depends on how many fine things we own and consume, which in turn demands that we own the means to enable this unlimited accumulation and consumption. In short, we need money, credit, and the status and power that accompany these means. When we value wealth, we value profit. And when we value profit, we value efficiency and competition. And this brings us back to loneliness. Competition pits one person against another. What could wealth mean outside the context of money? We might consider it in terms of enjoyment, following Franco Berardi, who redefines wealth as the simple capacity to enjoy the world. I am wealthy if I have the time and if I am sufficiently free to experience enjoyment within the limits of my circumstances. But what if we were to understand wealth as the accumulation of experiences, whether enjoyable or painful? We prosper when we have experiences that enhance the meaningfulness of our lives, among which I would include friendship, kindness, care, love, reflection, belonging, creativity, solidarity, shared projects, and personal fulfillment. Suffering may also enhance meaningfulness. Who has not, for example, accepted the pain that accompanies love? Who has not understood that grief after the death of a loved one illuminates how meaningful that person has been for us? Meaningfulness and happiness do not necessarily coincide. Without meaningfulness in our lives, regardless of how much money we have, we will not prosper. Let us be gluttons for meaningful experiences then, rather than for consumable objects. These two ways of understanding prosperity are in tension. Prosperity understood as financial power is not compatible with prosperity understood as enjoyment or meaningfulness. The more time we spend working to gain wealth, the less time we have to enjoy the world as it is given to us. An objection could be raised here. Redefining prosperity to mean enjoyment is easy to advocate when one is speaking from a position of financial security. As an avid consumer of Korean television drama, I want to add here that this question of how to define prosperity is one of the most striking themes of this genre, deeply implicated in the pursuit of a meaningful life. We find astute critiques of achievement society in such shows as My Liberation Notes, Chocolate, My Mister, Misang, and Our Unwritten Soul. I could name many others, all of which depict the antisocial effects of workplace competition and hierarchies. In almost every Korean drama I have watched, I'm around 30, maybe 35, there is at least one character who embarks on a quest for meaning, portrayed as an act of resistance to a soul-crushing work culture or family situation. Meaning is inevitably found in friendship. In Misang, young interns in a company struggle against the often harsh demands for deference to authority and hierarchical norms, the pecking order of wealth and competition. They fight against the idea that profit is the only value of hard work. In Chocolate, staff at a hospice fight to make death meaningful in the face of a conglomerate attempting to close the hospice because it isn't profitable. In response to a callous remark that people are only there to die, the main protagonist protests, "They are not here only to die. They are living their lives, cherishing each day." These are beautiful examples of the effort to maintain one's humanity in an often inhuman world. We must imagine another way for human beings to live together. I have redefined connection from a purely functional, logical, and disembodied interaction to an empathic relation to others that has the power to transform us. I have redefined prosperity as the accumulation of meaningful experiences rather than the accumulation of wealth, and rejected the instrumental attitude of our achievement society. When we reflect on what a sustainable future means, I suggest we move from thinking about innovation to invention, for which we will need to mobilize the imagination. To imagine is to think freely, unburdened by the pressure of the status quo, by the weight of tradition, or even present reality, and to resist our hardwired tendency to conform. To imagine is an invitation to envision the unimaginable. In a technologically sophisticated age, our imaginations do not match our capacity to produce. This was Gunther Anders' claim. It explained for him why human beings produced a bomb without imagining the outcome of its deployment. The imaginations of the bomb's creators were too small. They couldn't compete with the logic of a technological age which said, "Let's make this bomb because we can." We have never needed a bigger, richer imagination than we need now. I hope we can all agree with Anders' 70-year-old declaration that if we are not to lose everything, we have to develop our moral imagination. His point was that in order to care for the world, a future world, we must be able to imagine the worst so that we are fearful enough to act to prevent it. We can also mobilize our imaginations in a more positive sense. The imagination can free us from the bleak reality of the present. Crisis and catastrophe cause immense suffering, but they also open up possibilities. Although uncertainty can be unbearable, it means that the future is not foreclosed. Good as well as evil can come from the unpredictable. The imagination has always been an essential condition for transforming the wrongs of the world. It invites us to ask, what kind of world do we want to build? What image or vision do we have of the future? In order to ask these questions, our understanding of a sustainable future must also be extracted from technological and economic assumptions. I will make a generalization here from a Western perspective. Since European industrialization and the birth of the individual, we have envisioned the future as something we own. Technological advancements and the capacity to exploit natural resources and the working classes have led us to believe the path to a future of unlimited material comfort and happiness is guaranteed, at least for some, and the rest of the world would allegedly benefit from a trickle-down effect. This economic understanding of the future is one that has been normalized for centuries. The future is merely another techno-economic term like prosperity and innovation. The future now belongs to the fantasies of global technocrats. But climate change and the erosion of democracy are exposing the mythical proportions of this liberal ideology of perpetual progress. I think many of us in the academy, at least in the West, are afraid to speak of the future to our students. And when we do, we recite the platitudes of the past, promising them opportunity and possibility, and that if they work hard, they will be successful. But perhaps this adult fear is merely the outcome of our having to leave behind our own illusions of unlimited progress. We have grown used to an economic understanding of the future, and we now have to invent a novel way to think about it. Because we would then have to learn how to rely on each other rather than on money. As Simone Weil put it, to imagine a future society, which for her meant a free society, is not to hope that it can actually be achieved, but to hope that by imagining it, we can attain a less imperfect freedom than what we have. In the spirit of Weil's intention, I want to reflect on what we need in order to experience a less imperfect social landscape than the one we presently inhabit. First, I don't want to experience empathic relationships in spite of the obstacles thrown up to prevent such relationships. I want to refuse to adjust to desert conditions. This means I want to live in a society that values kindness as the most common form of interaction, rather than a rarity that we greet with surprise. I would like friendship bonds to carry the social value currently held by romantic love and family bonds, so that living alone would not be stigmatized, and so that the family unit would not be the only option for care and a sense of belonging. To imagine new collective approaches to care, we have to imagine a world in which profit is not the sole driving force, a monumental task for sure. But we can imagine it, because not everyone is motivated by profit. So I imagine a life in which economic success is not our primary value. When we ask our children, what do you want to be when you grow up? It will be a question about character rather than occupation. We will ask, who do you want to be when you grow up? To express our wish that they will be thoughtful adults, respectful of others, with the strength to fight for what is right and just, and to care for the well-being of the small place in the world to which they belong. I want to live in a world in which the race for profit and the best education to kickstart this race is replaced by the race to save the planet and all the forms of life it supports, to save it from human destruction. Our current economic system, propelled by an insatiable desire to accumulate than to throw away and accumulate more, is hostile to such a vision. Even if we are not personally motivated by wealth and status, the system sucks us into its vortex. We become unwilling participants in a race to race with ever more speed. Like the arms race or the race for an elite education, which cannot end unless every player resists, laying down their arms or their competitive ambition. The race for profit is impossible to resist alone. So my vision includes a society in which solidarity is second nature to us. We will know how to gather together in our neighborhoods, our communities, our villages and cities to discuss the problems that affect us collectively and come up with solutions. And we will know how to fight together when resistance is necessary, as South Koreans did when threatened with martial law last spring. Failing that, I wish for a society in which we can each take a principled moral stand and hope that others will join us. I recently came across a line from a poem by the Palestinian poet Mahmoud Darwish, which I will extract from the context in which it appears and claim as a universal message. He says, "We have on this earth what makes life worth living." In the lines that follow, Darwish refers to the everyday sensuous elements of life, the aroma of fresh bread, the texture of moss on a stone. And I hope we'll never forget what makes life meaningful. The search for meaning in life is slow and inconvenient and never lucrative. It demands attention to the smallest things, a spontaneous conversation on a subway car between strangers, a pause on the sidewalk during rush hour to help someone in need, missing a work deadline because a friend is grieving. The antidotes to loneliness ask us, above all, for sensitivity and empathy, to allow ourselves to be bothered or inconvenienced by someone else. Our challenge, our Sisyphean task is this: the solution to loneliness all run counter to the values and habits we have acquired in a technological and capitalist age that shows few signs of altering its socially destructive course. We need to ensure that our vision remains clear-eyed and inspires us to acquire new habits, because we have in the world around us what makes life worth living. Thank you.